Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Boswell. Here. Mr. Gabbard. Here. Mr. Geraci.
Here.
Mr. Kelch.
Here.
Mr. DiNardo.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Brady. Here.
All members present. Moving on to amendment of agenda. Item F, we are removing the minutes from November 10th, 2020 meeting, and we are adding the communication from MSD under item P. May I have a motion? Mr. Boswell?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we remove the agenda.
Motion by Mr. Boswell. May I have a second? Mr. DeNardo. Any discussion? Please call roll.
Mr. Boswell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson. Mr. Brady.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item F, minutes of the previous meeting, minutes from October 27th, 2020. Mr. Boswell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we accept the minutes with one amendment under item Q. Just noting that it says all members present except for Mr. Gracie voted yes, Mr. Thomas and Gracie voted no. So we would ask them to add a line that Mr. Gracie voted no.
Thank you, Mr. Bronson. Motion by Mr. Bronson. May I have a second? Mr. Brady?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Boswell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Thompson. Mr. Brady.
All members present? Voting yes, the motion passes. Moving on to item H, request to address council. We have one request, Stevie, Pastor Sonny James, regarding the field. Pastor James.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the 170,000 people in our country who just in one day, a 24-hour period, now learned that they have COVID. And so our prayers go out to them, certainly to their families and to their communities, and to the medical staff that will be treating them, because we know that 85,000 are spending this holiday season not with their families, but in a hospital somewhere around this country. So our prayers go out to them. I want to thank our team during this holiday season, as early as just this evening. We've successfully distributed almost 80 Thanksgiving holiday baskets, turkeys and all, to families. And I appreciate some of our community partners, like New Vision Missionary Baptist Church, 3851 Montgomery Road, who has taken on the task every Tuesday and Thursday to supply food for our families, not just right here in Norwood, but all over. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm really excited, guys, to announce to you all that my son, Lemuel James, has come before you all and shared with our mayor, Chief knows, and all of you know, that his heart's desires to go into law enforcement, but because of some of the negative rhetoric that have taken place, he really became disheartened. Well, I want to announce now, though, that he is in his second week at the academy through his current employer. My prayer is that he won't give up on Norwood and continue to strive. He wants to be the first African American
police officer in Norwood's history, and of course his goal is to be the chief one day. And so my prayer for Lemuel and all others is that they will be encouraged and motivated on a daily basis. And one day maybe our mayor will realize how important it is to address African Americans that are coming up, that have grown up in Norwood and have actually come through our school systems, come through our junior police program, the Explorers, and that we can grow as a community, because we really do have fine individuals. I also want to thank Mr. Kelch and some others that have made it a point to make sure that African Americans in our community are kept abreast on when job postings and job opportunities are available. Mr. Racy has done an excellent job of trying to keep me in the loop. Sometimes communication on my end has been bad, but keeping me in the loop so that African American residents can be treated as a priority in Norwood. I want to also congratulate Norwood Together. I recently was very honored to participate in their open house and public hearing about the program with advancing our opportunities on Montgomery Road. Phenomenal. But I was really excited because I came in and I saw Mr. Ty, an African American man who sits also on the planning committee, and that's really impressive. No matter what we look at around our country, no matter what side you're on, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, Mr. Biden has to get one kudos from me, and that is if you look at his cabinet that he's now putting together, guys, I just want to encourage all of us here in Norwood to continue to remember that all lives matters, and that's true enough. But one of the things that we've got to start doing is recognizing the importance to build it black. But when we have leadership that, in my opinion, I can't even get a return email. Somebody can come in our neighborhood with a firearm, and I can intervene and stop that person from being shot and murdered, and I can send a letter out and, in fact, won't even get a response. Guys, we've got to really turn things around. We're making a lot of positive progress in Norwood, but when it comes to the leaders of our administration, the reality is they do what they want to do, how they want to do, when they want to do, and why they want to do, and why they don't want to do. And so I want to just put everybody on point and notice that, we're coming up again here in Norwood. And so after this beautiful election period, let's get ready, residents, to put the people here that have our best interests at heart. Finally, I do want to say on January the 15th, we are having a march right here in Norwood to just bring about unity and peace, and the children will be out front of this march. Maybe the mayor will finally respond to that type of an email. I'm not quite sure. Maybe the chief of police will respond. I'm not quite sure. But I pray that when you guys get these emails as council members, you owe it to the residents to respond. So God bless you all. Happy Thanksgiving to Norwood, to each of you, and to your families. God bless.
Thank you, Pastor James. Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council, Parks, Recreation, Public Spaces Committee meeting. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces, to whom was referred Citizen-Led Projects and Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces Capital Improvement Plan, beg to leave to submit the following report. We had a lack of quorum, so Mr. DiNardo and Mr. Kelch held open discussion about ASAP Norwood's updates and the Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces Capital Improvements Plan. This meeting was held on November 18, 2020 at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. DiNardo.
Vote that we receive the report.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to receive and file the report. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunsell?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item 2, Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee meeting. Mr. DiNardo.
Yes. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, we, the Committee of Finance, Budget, and Audit, to whom was referred TIPS, beg to leave to submit the following report. We met with Jim Stith, Audit Department, and Tim Gary, Law Department, and the rest of the committee to discuss moving forward with Linden Point and Rookwood Exchange TIPS. With Linden Point, we reviewed the potential savings associated with refunding at a better rate, and will go through the next steps to execute. With Rookwood Exchange, we agreed to move forward with extending by 30 years, recommend extending by 30 years, knowing future councils can revert back at any time. It just provides options, which we'll see discussed on the agenda here tonight. We all discussed the FRP process timeline, working to February of 2021. Respectfully submitted, Eric Tenardo, James Bonzel, John Braden, Chris Kelsch.
Thank you, Mr. Nardo. Mr. Kelch.
Move that we receive and file the report.
Motion by Mr. Kelch. Mr. Bonzel.
Second that.
Second by Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on, item J, we don't have any third readings. Item K, second readings, we don't have any this evening. And moves us on to item L, introductory reading of ordinances and resolutions. Item L1, an ordinance authorizing an amendment to ordinance 43-2011, passed September 27th, 2011, to extend the term of the tax increment financing structure for the Rookwood Exchange project for an additional 30 years pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 5709.51, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring emergency.
Yep.
Mr. DiNardo.
I'd like to put a motion to have all three readings, and we did discuss this, a reason for doing that, we did discuss this at the Finance Committee, and welcome to be able to discuss this tonight.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Bonzel.
Second that motion.
Second by Mr. Bonzel. Discussion. Mr. Gabbard.
So by extending this, I mean, what's our benefits? And what's the benefit to extending this another 30 years?
Mr. DiNardo.
Yeah, I can.
Um,
Sorry. So we discussed kind of like what's the win sort of thing. It's first important to note out why this came up. It seems that we're not able to just go extend any of our TIFs. In fact, odds are we almost usually are not able to extend the timeline of these TIF districts or otherwise. In this case, I guess there was some loophole in the language that might have been set for another TIF in Ohio, and this particular one falls under the dollar threshold and timing to allow us to extend it if we wanted to. So really we were discussing, well, do we want to? Because this seems like a unique, potentially opportunity, or I'll say a unique circumstance. And with Jim's there and with Tim Gary there, we kind of went roundabout. I think you were there. And we went roundabout, just kind of like, you know, what does this do? And it could mean it's beneficial to Norwood. It could mean that it's not. I think we decided, though, that allowing us to extend gives future councils the ability to decide at any period between now and, you know, I think it's like 57 years from now, the chance to review. And so this vote here just allows us the opportunity to allow the TIF to go forward. But we can stop at any time, or future versions of us can stop at any time.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. DiNardo, I think, said it well. I mean, essentially, this is opening up options for the city for the future. If we did not extend the TIF, the city would receive, I think somewhere, you sent me about it, somewhere around $250,000 or $220,000 a year in property taxes. If we did extend the TIF district would receive, over $700,000 a year in the district that can be used for things that support the district, roads around it, infrastructure around it, various things. And by extending it now, we're giving city leaders in the future the option to, keep that extension, or they can choose if they want to not extend it. But I mean, it essentially is just opening up opportunities for for the future. And I think it's essentially too, we could, that money doesn't always have to all be used every year as well. So there's going to be like $700 and something thousand a year once we pay off the bonds. Let's just say the city only uses $200,000 a year. Well, it can build up in the TIF fund. It doesn't have to all be used, from my understanding. Feel free to correct me. So at the end of that 30-year period, if there is extra dollars that are left in there, when we close the TIF fund, then I think that reverts back to the general fund. Is that? I'll leave that to the law
Off the
department.
top of my head, I don't know that 60 years out. Patrick would.
Yes, your point, that's correct. And once the TIF fund is either expired or you essentially terminate it, any funds in that TIF that are not required to pay either, basically, if they're not required to pay debt service, because in this case, bonds are being paid off, all those funds would be able to be deposited to the general fund and used for whatever eligible uses there are from the general fund itself. Sorry, I won't take up all your time today discussing it, but to your point, there is a unique opportunity this year to extend it, and the ability to do that will basically go away once we hit January 1, 2021. So, like you said, this is the ability to extend it for 30 years, but once the debt that is secured by those revenues is paid off, you would have the ability to terminate it if you so choose, or future council would, in the future.
Could you do me a favor, please? Could you come to the microphone, because no one at home can hear you.
Oh, I apologize. So to the first point, once the TIF is terminated, any funds in the TIF fund would be able to be deposited into the city's general fund and used for whatever eligible purposes, or you could otherwise use money in the general fund. What else?
The second point on why do we get this opportunity? Why did it come about?
Yeah, so essentially there has been something added to the statute. As you noted, we assume it's in connection with somebody's efforts to extend a TIF in connection with a particular project. But what the statute says is that this year, if you had TIF revenues from a particular TIF area that exceeded $1.5 million, so if 2019's TIF revenues exceeded $1.5 million in the Norwood TIF district, which they did, excuse me, you're able to extend your TIF by 30 years. Once we pass into 2021, you would only be allowed to extend it if the year immediately prior exceeded 1.5 million, but the year before that did not exceed 1.5 million. So essentially, they make it very hard to extend your TIF by 30 years in the future. And in this particular case, you would not be able to do it ever, again, unless they change the rules in connection with the Rookwood Exchange TIF. So sorry, that was a little mental math gymnastics there, but again, I think it was put in particular to have a limited scope, but it is something that the city, in this case, is able to take advantage of due to the historic revenues from this particular TIF area.
Anyone else?
Good?
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Bunsell?
So, I mean, with what was said, the fact that if there's money left over at the end, that goes back into the general fund. But just like one scenario I could kind of point out, let's just say we have $700,000 a year after we pay off the bonds that's kind of going into this TIF district after we pay the school district. So $700,000 after we pay the school district. Let's say we use an average of $200,000 a year for road maintenance around the area, it could be water line maintenance, whatever could be used for it, but just various infrastructure improvements. That still leaves $500,000, in the fund. If that fund were to build up over that 30 years and that $500,000 were to kind of stay there almost as a savings account, at the end of that TIF district, when 30 years later when it expires, that's $15 million that basically be going into the city's general fund when they close the TIF district. So essentially, we're just kind of, it doesn't have to work like that. It could be that the city decides they don't want to continue it in 2045 or 2050, right, and they close it. But we're just given the options for these future elected officials to
to make, and it's kind of exciting that we're able to take the actions now to really kind of set them up in the future, just to have the options to do what they want to do with it. So that's why I'll be voting yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Gabbard?
Question through the chair to the law director. I'm guessing probably you, Keith. I'm sorry, put you on the spot. How big is the district? How big is the circumference area, the area around that's actually designated as a part of the TIF that we could use?
The TIF district itself is Rookwood Exchange. What you can use the money for has to serve that development or that area. But to give you an example, the Linden Point TIF, we redid the bridge over the lateral, which is not on the Linden Point site, but it served that development. We realigned the street next to Linden Point, closed the interstate exit, and put in a whole new road. Around here, in theory, you could redo all of the roads in that big triangle around there. You could, in theory, rebuild the bridge, either one of the bridges over the interstate. You could build a pedestrian bridge from one Rookwood to another, or from Rookwood to Cornerstone, or you could rebuild the parking garage. Or it could just be money that's available 20-some years from now. Whoever owns that site may want to do something entirely different and come to the city and say, if we can tip this and we can borrow this much money, then I can do this really cool project. That's basically what it does.
Thank you.
And just real quick, I'd like to add that assumes that the law will stay essentially the same. It might, there's a possibility that it will change, but that assuming those kinds of things stay essentially the way they are now, and what's allowed stays the way it is now, that's what it would look like in 20-some years.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? We have a motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Bonsall, suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Yes, please.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes.
An ordinance authorizing an amendment to Ordinance 43-2011, passed September 27, 2011, to extend the term of the tax increment financing structure for the Rookwood Exchange project for an additional 30 years pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 5709.51, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing an amendment to Ordinance 43-2011, passed September 27, 2011, to extend the term of the tax increment financing structure for the Rookwood Exchange project for an additional 30 years pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 5709.51, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing an amendment to Ordinance 43-2011, passed September 27, 2011, to extend the term of the tax increment financing structure for the Rookwood Exchange project for an additional 30 years pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 5709.51, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to pass the ordinance.
Second.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to L2, an ordinance authorizing an amendment to management and maintenance agreement with Danamount Square LLC, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to have all three readings. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I would just be curious if either the law department or the mayor just has any additional information to add about kind of how this came about and what are some of the points that this changes for the public.
I'll defer to the law director. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is the ordinance amending an amendment to the management and maintenance agreement with Danamont Square LLC. So within the university station, I call it the Xavier, I can never remember the actual university station or university square, whatever it is. Within that development, there are portions of it that have parking meters. And it's not the best. The owner, Danamont, wants to shift to parking permits with a different kind of structure, and this allows them to do that for the portions that are indicated. I think it should be on one of the attachments. It was highlighted on those areas, on parts that are there. The revenues from that get handled the same way. They basically go to maintain the project. And basically it just allows them to do that, and they'd like to switch over to a new kind of system that includes, the app, paying for the permits through an app. The permits don't last more than 3 months, but to do that before the end of the year. So they're asking that council move this forward quickly. Essentially, it has no effect on the city of Norwood whatsoever. It lets them do what they want.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Mr. Geraci.
Through the chair to law. So this is only within the bounds of University Station, correct? Not the plaza?
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, that's correct, and it's only part of the parking. It's kind of the lot parking in the middle, as opposed to, it's not the outskirts. They're more retail. This is more serving some of the office tenants in there, but it's just a portion, and it's only within the University Station development, not the plaza, not the boundary streets, just within the development.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just also, the reason why this is even necessary is because the funds that were used to construct the streets and the parking, those specific spots, were done through, TIF dollars, essentially. So they're public improvements, if you will. And so the money is public. And so the parking pass fees, just like the parking revenue fees from those went into the TIF district, the parking pass fees will go into the TIF district as well. And so it essentially basically funds the, paying off the bonds. And, and at the end, if there is money left over, just like that, it comes back to the city. The other thing I was told, about this is that if the redeveloper, or basically Danamont and the city came to an agreement here that if we were to refinance the bonds, that they no longer have to have approval from Danamont to do that, whereas right now they do. Do you have any information on that?
That's one of the, it was a great suggestion, and I can't remember maybe it was Patrick's. It was a great suggestion because that's the thing, is right now under the terms of that TIF, if the city wanted to refinance it when those bonds are callable, we'd need the approval of the developer. And so as a side agreement, they've agreed that they will sign a separate instrument that waives their right to say no if the city wants to refinance. They'll get notice, but they won't be able to veto that or stand in the way of it. So, although we don't have the draft of that yet, but before the mayor or the service safety director signs the agreement on the meters, we expect to have that sitting right next to it so we can have them sign it.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonzo.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The other part is the enforcement. So in this agreement, it talks about that the redeveloper may enforce the use of the parking spaces within the parking pass areas for holders of parking passes only. And it also says enforce the office and retail marked spaces and enforce the use of the meters. How does the redeveloper enforce the parking there? I guess how's it done today, and how are they saying that it's going to be done?
Mr. Moore.
I don't know if the city writes parking tickets there or not. I know we write a lot of parking tickets near and on part of the Xavier development, and I think those may actually be, but for those lots, what it basically would be, they tell you if you're parked there without a permit, just like they do if you park there and you're not feeding the meter.
Gotcha. So then the question is the city going to be writing I think we're supposed to probably write tickets there when people are parked there without putting money in the meter. Will that continue, I guess is what I'm asking, or does this amend that at all that you know of, or?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we would continue to write tickets and enforce those. That's the only stream of income that the city gets, that's a clear and stream of income from these. All of the other funds, parking permits and all of that go into the TIF. So yes, we would continue to do that.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Motion on the floor by Mr. Bonzel, second by Mr. Braden, to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
An ordinance authorizing an amendment to management and maintenance agreement with Danamont Square LLC, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing an amendment to management and maintenance agreement with Danamont Square LLC, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing an amendment to management and maintenance agreement with Danamont Square LLC, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L3, ordinance authorizing the Norwood Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement with Advertising Vehicles Incorporated, doing business as Adsposure for the supply of certain digital and static signage. Mr. DiNardo.
I would like to make a motion that we have the first reading.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the first reading. Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to second that motion, please.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
We do have Mr. Kim Black here, who is from Adsposure. If anyone has any questions, I know we'll have 2 more readings on this, and hopefully we can get this started by the end of the year and have these up this spring and start working towards getting them paid off so we can generate some money ourselves. But if anybody has any questions for Mr. Black, he was gracious enough to come tonight.
Any questions? Mr. DiNardo.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thanks for coming, and also to kind of give some kudos. I think in the committees we did talk about this a lot more than it's probably sounding like right now. But so I think we weighed up, and this is round 3 by my count of the conversation. So it is 3 more times we're going to be talking about this to give people, you know, a real fair shake at their comments. But I just wanted to kind of say my mind, and I think a few of us are wanting to move forward with the benefits seem to vastly outweigh the costs in my mind. So.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Gabbard.
I just want to extend to you, Mr. Black, if you have any comments that you'd like to make or anything like that?
Not anything that I haven't said. I mean, I will throw out there again that if anyone does have any questions, whether it's tonight or a phone call tomorrow or any time, I'm available to answer the questions. Hopefully we provided all the information that you guys need. If there's any questions about the documents we provided, proposals, projections, we're happy to go over it and detail that out to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Gabbard.
Just want to thank you for reaching out to Norwood and giving us the opportunity to do this. I'm sure you could have gone some other places to work this out. And so we appreciate you coming with us and being so cordial with working with the administration and the building department and everyone to get sign off on this. So thank you very much. And as we alluded to, tonight will be the first reading. We have second and third and vote. So hopefully In the next 2 council meetings, we'll be finished with that. We'll have a final vote, and you can get to work. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Thank you, Mr. Black. Any further discussion, comments? Motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Gabbard, have the first reading. Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Oh, we still need to do the roll. I'm tired, y'all, sorry. Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Mrs. Williams?
Ordinance authorizing the Norwood Safety Service Director to enter an agreement with Advertising Vehicles Incorporated, DBA Adsposure, for the supply of certain digital and static signage.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L4, resolution supporting a public health advisory for Norwood residents due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we suspend the rules, have all 3 readings of this resolution.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings
Oh, excuse me, Mr. President.
Entire?
With its first in its entirety.
in its entirety.
With its first one, yes, thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Second, question to Mr. Bonsall. Would you rather have it read in its entirety or have the actual advisory read? What do you think would be better? I don't know if you had a preference.
I would say we should read the resolution in its entirety, and then I would invite anybody that wants to read the advisory to do that during the discussion.
Second.
So motion by Mr. Bonzo, second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. So, on the November 19th, 2020, which is Thursday, I apologize to the law department for late notice on the resolution, but we just gotten it. The Norwood City Health Department issued a COVID-19 health advisory. I'd like to read that if possible, just so that everybody can know in case they haven't read it, but it says, the city of Norwood and Hamilton County areas are experiencing exponential growth in the number of COVID-19 cases. The positivity rates of tests has climbed above 10%, and hospital staff and physical facilities are becoming taxed beyond their capacity. It is more important than ever to follow guidance from local, state, and federal officials about how to slow and stop the spread of COVID-19. The Norwood City Health Department urges all residents to follow these steps to prevent the spread of the virus, protect the lives of you and your loved ones, and preserve your acute and other healthcare services and capacity. These items are stay at home as much as possible, only leave home for work, school, or essential needs such as food or medical care, limit exposure in your home, only allow immediate household members inside, rethink your holiday plans to eliminate gatherings, continue to follow all health orders and advisories, wear a mask, maintain at least 6 feet of distance from others, wash hands frequently, and stay home when you are ill. All gatherings should be limited to 10 or fewer people. This includes both inside and outside of your home. If you have symptoms of COVID-19, including but not limited to new onset of fever, cough, shortness of breath, congestion or runny nose, sore throat, new loss of taste or smell, body aches or unusual fatigue, isolate yourself and call your primary care provider for next steps. If you have been diagnosed with COVID-19, you must isolate yourself for 10 days from the date of symptom onset or from the date of test collection until you are not experiencing symptoms. At home, sick or infected household members should separate themselves from healthy household members by staying in a specific sick room or area and use a separate bathroom if available. Don't wait to hear from your health department. Begin these steps immediately. Residents who have been identified as a contact with an individual diagnosed with COVID-19 should quarantine for 1 full incubation period, 14 days, from the date of last contact. Individuals in quarantine should stay home, separate from other household members, monitor their health, and follow all instructions from the Norwood City Health Department. Employers are strongly encouraged to allow remote working arrangements for as many employees as possible. And then visit www.coronavirus.ohio.gov for more COVID-19 information and guidance. So that's the advisory from the Norwood City Health Department. Hamilton County Public Health also issued a very similar advisory on the 19th as well. So I appreciate our health department's kind of coordination with our other county officials. The reason for the resolution is just really simple. It's just throwing our weight behind saying, look, we support our health department in making this advisory, and we ask citizens as much as possible to, try to follow it. Nobody's going to be perfect on it. There's a lot of great suggestions here, and I don't think anybody's saying that it needs to all be required, but what we're just trying to say is let's try to slow the spread, let's try to be responsible, and that's kind of what this resolution does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Anyone else? Motion on the floor by motion by Mr. Bonsall, second by Mr. Thompson to have the resolution read in its entirety.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Mrs. Williams.
Resolution supporting a public health advisory for Norwood residents due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas the city of Norwood and the nation are in the grips of the COVID-19 global health pandemic. And whereas Norwood has experienced over 500 cases of COVID-19 with 7 deaths. And whereas local positivity rates have exceeded 10% in Hamilton County. And whereas current trends indicate rapid and significant community spread of the virus. Whereas additional intervention is necessary and warranted to mitigate case growth and preserve hospital capacity. And whereas public health institutions have advised that residents can take practical and meaningful steps to prevent the spread of the virus, protect fellow residents, and preserve the capacity of our critical healthcare services. And whereas the Council of the City of Norwood wishes to be as proactive as possible in preventing the spread of the virus and in helping to preserve healthcare capacity. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, does hereby support the COVID-19 Health Advisory issued November 19, 2020 by the Norwood City Health Department, a copy of which is attached to this resolution, and urges Norwood residents to follow the best practices delineated in the advisory.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonsall?
I think that the motion that I made was to do all 3 readings, but the first in its entirety.
Yes.
I don't know if that, I just want to make sure that we might have to vote again, if that's what you understood as well.
Yeah, that's what I had.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yep. So the next 2 readings, resolution supporting a public health advisory for Norwood residents due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Resolution supporting a public health advisory for Norwood residents due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Braden?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any further discussion? Mr. Thompson?
I'd just like to point out that since you have this ordinance drafted, we're now over 600 cases, total cases within the city of Norwood, and we've had an additional fatality. This came out in notes today. So just to give you an idea of how quickly it's moving, this was drafted at the end of last week. We've got we're at 633 total cases now. We added 46 new diagnoses between Friday and today. So it's moving quickly. It's definitely community spread. It's important that we all try to do our best to keep this low. Our hospitals are starting to be taxed, and we're going into a time when people are going to be spending more time together and indoors, and I'm afraid it's probably just going to get worse. So everybody, just please think of your neighbors and take care of each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gowan?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye, resolution passes. Thank you. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. President. I got a list of things here to talk about. We have some upcoming appointments with the passing of the Arts Board. There were 2 Norwood residents that contacted me through the process. Both Virginia Patterson and Tanya Pope, both people that have been heavily involved in the city and doing different things, have asked to be on the Art Board. I have one other person that is a person of interest that I've spoke to about that was heavily involved in Cincinnati's the formation of the Artworks organization as a Norwood resident. And we're working to find a couple of the right people. And it's interesting because as I talk to these people, they're saying, well, what exactly does the Arts Board do and what's the criteria for it? And, it's interesting because I get to tell them that we're setting that criteria up. We're going to have some meetings and we'll brainstorm and we'll come up with all the plans and look at how other arts boards run and really these are sort of the founding members of it. So that's going to be an interesting part of the beginning of next year as we get these people. So you'll see some names coming to you for that. We had a person, Chris Brown, has put in his resignation from both the Planning Commission and the BZA. He's taken a different position in his professional life, and that does not work with him at this point. So we've got to make a couple of appointments there. Chris Brown has worked as the liaison between both of those organizations. You have to have one member that's on both the BZA, the Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Planning Commission. So I talked to Bernie Seward and I talked to Sandra Kelly. Both of them are active members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And Sandra Kelly has said that she would take that position if I appoint her to the Planning Commission. So she would be that liaison person. And then I have another person I'll call him a person of interest, that is an architect in the city that's been involved in a lot of different activities, that is interested in being on the Planning Commission also. And then I have a challenge with another person on the BZA that I've got to get squared away. So those things are all in the works. Those are the mandated by the Ohio Revised Code commissions that have to be in place. They play a critical role in the city. And I'm trying to get good people in there and to make sure that we're going in the right direction. I also have an appointment that's coming up for the Civil Service Commission. There's a person that's coming off of that. Hers is expiring soon, so I'll be putting a person in that position also. Typically, these people are people that I know, that are brought to me by other community members that know them, that have certain qualifications that make them a better candidate than others. These are not posted positions. These are positions clearly that are for the mayor to make. And so I'm finding the right people through word of mouth from the people that know the positions are open. Canmore and Cathedral, both of those streets, I don't know if anybody has been driving down those streets, but they're completed. They put their top coat on. There are some areas that need to be corrected. There's some corners that need to be corrected. There's some things that need to be done. But our engineering team is on it. The safety service director is on it. And those will be finished up here, completely finished up soon. I know they were running the street sweeper on Shanmore on Saturday morning early. So it was interesting to see that. Then Indian Mound starts in December. So they've already started some of the tree removal stuff, things like that. But they should be starting on curb work. The next step you should see is basically all the men working signs, all those orange construction signs coming off of Shanmore and Cathedral. It's the same company, so they'll probably move them up to Indian Mound and Wakefield and Sheridan, all in those areas. So look at that coming. Those projects will get started soon. And I'm glad, because that's going to be a great project, and we should see some really nice upgrades there. So for the water department, there's a soft grade upgrade that went in place. Software upgrade, what did I say, software upgrade going on in the water department. This is something that's been, something that's been needed for a long time. It's the same software upgrade that the auditor's office was going through. I don't know if maybe you've heard something about, they put out the disclaimer saying this is going to be a really tough one. We might have problems with the software, but quite frankly, I think the implementation has went very well. I think that the employees have all stepped up and did the training that was necessary. There's always challenges to it, but in talking to the auditor, the staff's really doing a great job at trying to work out the kinks and working through it. So Invoice Cloud is another one. That is online paying of bills online for the water department with your water bills. Very nice. It's good to have that system going. It's there's tweaks, there's things that need to be corrected, but the staff is working hard to get that going on. A big one last year at this time, still a big concern, was our water distribution system and our water towers. Clint Zimmerman is our operator of record, right? So you have an operator of record for our water distribution system. Clint Zimmerman continues to work with the EPA. He's having constant meetings with them. I'm sitting in on some of these Zoom meetings with him. He impresses me more and more with his knowledge and quite frankly, his communication skills when it comes to working with these EPA scientists. And so Clint really is doing a great job there. Fingers crossed, some of the most recent stuff that I've seen and that he's mentioned to me is the potential of not needing the water tanks at all for our water distribution system. Now, there's going to be some expense with doing that because there's some regulators or bifibulator valves or something. Okay, that's not the real scientific word, but quite frankly, there are some changes that are going to have to be made so that we can eliminate the water towers, but it's potentially something that can happen, which would be awful nice. We'd much rather eliminate them than have to pay for a brand new huge water tower out there. So, but Clint is on top of that. I really can't speak highly enough about him. Leaf collection is ongoing right now. We're a little bit behind. It took them 2 weeks to get my leaves. I don't know how long it's taken other people, but it's taken a while. I live on Floral Avenue. There's a lot of leaves out there. They've been running with one system, with the big one pull behind trailer-mounted system. Just this week, just Monday, they received another system, another leaf back that hooks to the back of a truck, back of a dump truck, and they have a dump box that's on there. So they've had, I think they had both of them out today. I think they'll have both of them out as quickly as they can, and they'll be getting caught up on leaves. It only takes a little bit of cold weather and a big windstorm, and everybody's leaves are down. I know I raked leaves, and then the next day was, I raked them on the Saturday, and then we had the big storm come through, windstorm with 50 mile-an-hour winds, and my whole yard was filled with leaves again. So just bear with us, be patient. They are working hard to get that stuff going on. Holiday lights are going up. I don't know if any of you went past the police department this morning early, but they have some beautiful blue lights on top of the police station. And then they've got the pole lights are going up, the lights on all the trees going up and down Montgomery Road. They have lit up wreaths that'll go up on, and they have a really nice, what I consider to be a really nice holiday light display that the city is working on that you'll see being turned on here soon. Talking about COVID, we continue to have, the city administration continues to have meetings and discuss how we are reacting to COVID and how we are making sure that we can continue to provide the services that are critical to the residents of the city of Norwood. And those meetings are actually, I think they're pretty good because it helps us all focus on what's important. And we need to continue to be vigilant in our battle against COVID, because that's really what it is. And I know that council has said this for many months. We need to continue to take this seriously. This is a silent enemy, and it is an enemy. I talked to a person, they said they basically went into the hospital and lost 7 or 8 days of their life. They can't even because they were out of it. It's important. It's affecting my family, it's affecting your family, it's affecting our friends and neighbors. So remain ever vigilant on that. The health department is staying right on top of it. The health department continues to do their tracing and trying to coordinate and keep things going. They're the ones that are coming up with the numbers and helping with the information going out. But they're also working on the flu shots that need to go out. They're working on enforcement of other public health issues that go on every day for them. So the health department is nonstop, and I really do think that they are doing gangbuster work, just getting things done and staying on top of it, and being positive about it. I know if anybody would have COVID fatigue, it would be the members of our health department. But they've been positive. They try to keep it going in the right direction. They're really doing a good job for the city of Norwood. I guess the last part I would talk about would be the budget and the financial recovery plan. We continue. One of the things that's going on right now is open enrollment for medical insurance. Right. So all of our employees, you have a certain window where you can choose your medical insurance. Everybody goes through it if you're working for a company. That closes December 6th. What's important to us, to the auditor and to the mayor, is getting good numbers. By December 6th, that's when it closes, and we know what everybody chose, and we know how much it's going to cost. So that's December 6th is on a Friday. By Tuesday, the way that we've set this system up and the way that Haran has directed us to do this is by Tuesday of that next week, we'll have pretty good information on the choices that people made, and we should have some pretty good budget numbers for the next budget that we have to put in place. That's a big change from what's happened in years past, and the ability to get that information quickly and to get relatively accurate information for a budget process. So that was a lot of time and effort on the administration's part, and and the insurance committee. The city has an insurance committee, and we had meetings in this room, multiple meetings, to talk about how insurance is. We have meetings with them to talk about who's actually bidding on it and which one we should go with. So it was a large group effort by not just the administration, but also the employees of the city to bring this together and to work through this process. I think we have great medical insurance benefits for them that are being offered, and it's a good way to move forward. That's one of the areas that we said we've got to bid things out and we've got to do things right, because we've got to take advantage of all the savings that we can. We're also looking at city staffing changes to improve the services to the community members and businesses. And not just that, but city staffing changes that help our departments function better. So, sometimes you'll say, I worked at a company where there was an old company that's been around for years and years, and they had a whole campaign that said, get rid of the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs were not the people that were there. It was the old systems. It was the way that you were doing things over and over for years and years and years. And you didn't change it because it was awful hard to change. But we're working to make those changes. So the city administration continues to have meetings. We're having meetings all the time, talking about places we can save money, talking about how we can do it better, talking about the structure in each department. The police chief and the fire chief are coming together and saying, these are changes that we need to make that can make us better. And for me as the mayor, I love that. That's exactly what I said I wanted to get from the employees. They know the systems. Let's get some information from them. So we continue to work on those things, working with the auditor's office to make sure, and quite frankly, working with our financial supervisor, with the Financial Recovery Commission, and doing all those things, because changes don't happen overnight. They need to be planned out. There's a discovery phase. There's a lot of time and effort that has to go into making these changes. Not just because they're civil service employees and civil service ruling is there. You also have union employees, so you've got to look at the union contract and how everything goes on. Then you got to make sure that you're actually covering all the services that are there at the time and making sure. So it's a lengthy process to make positive change in the city. And then it would be, quite frankly, it'd be much easier if it was just city council that had to approve a budget and say, yeah, let's go in that direction. But it's not just city council that has to approve the budget. It's the Financial Recovery Commission. And it's the state auditor's office that has to look at it and say, yeah, that's a good plan, let's go down that direction. So I would like to get out of the fiscal emergency as quickly as possible. So we are masters of our own destiny. We're not asking somebody else. We're taking care of things. So that's it. That's what I have for my report. I'm sorry if I went long.
Thank you, Mayor Schneider. Any questions, comments? Mr. Boswell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to make a few comments about the Planning Commission. So I did just want to say, so while I consider the new appointee a very close personal friend, I will say that it's extremely disheartening to me to hear about the resignation of Mr. Chris Brown. Unlike badly managing departments in the city, which has a temporary impact and you can elect new leaders to then fix that, badly managing planning decisions has extremely long-lasting impacts for our community. Making planning decisions is arguably one of the most important functions of a city outside of public safety. However, again, with Chris Brown's resignation, we now are going to have nobody on the Planning Commission that has any planning experience. The city of Norwood is going to be at a massive disservice by the lack of a professional planning knowledge that is needed to demand high-quality development.
I've served on a planning commission in a city before moving to Norwood, and I can tell you the processes that are in place for our planning commission are, they're not good. I highly, highly recommend that the city hire an urban planner on contract that can attend your meetings and provide high-quality feedback to ensure that we are getting the best plans that we can get. I hope that I am wrong, and I hope that, the future on the planning commission looks bright, but from what I've seen so far, it definitely makes me worried. So I just ask that, we do what we can to shape that up and to really get that planning commission functioning at a high quality and high caliber way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Mr. Gabbard?
Yeah, I have a couple different things. Mr. Mayor, the lights on the bridge, Montgomery Road Bridge over the lateral, there's 14 letters, only one's lit up. It's been that way for a while. That's kind of embarrassing to drive on the lateral and only one letter is lit up on one direction and not even any on the other. So if we could get that addressed. The trees on Indian Mound, you mentioned those as far as that. I thought that those were gonna be like a case by case, man. We just went up there and it's just genocide. Did we not have an arborist or something that at least look at each tree and make sure we couldn't salvage it or make sure it was okay to be, torn down or cut down or whatever? I know the residents up there are not happy about that, but, and then with that, do we have any type of plan of, like to replant trees or smaller trees that won't mess with the curbs and sidewalks? Those are pretty big devil strips through there.
Mr. Mayor?
Was that a question?
Yeah, do we have a plan?
Okay,
Again,
well, I would say, Mr. Gabbard, the lights on the bridge, if you see any lights that are out, if you see anything like that, any maintenance issues that come about, please call Public Works, because you don't have to wait for a council meeting to tell me about it. Go ahead and call Public Works, and Clint will jump right on those things. So I just ask that you call Public Works, take me out of the middle of it. Although if you call Public Works and things aren't taken care of, absolutely bring it up to me and I'll jump right on it and I'll make sure, I'll light a fire. But those things I think are important. The trees are not being removed because they have emerald ash borer or because they're being removed because they are causing problems with the curbing or the street surface, or they are causing problems with the concrete that is part of the problem. My understanding was that every tree that was being removed, that the safety service director talked to those residents personally, talked to those residents and helped them understand why the trees were being removed. So the residents who live there were supposedly talked to by the safety service director. I can ask Mr. Murphy again if he did talk to them or not. So now, on the other hand, we do have a tree board. I don't know how active the tree board has not been real active, but we did plant, I think, 60 or 70 trees last year from a citizen-led effort. And I do think that we should, after the street is repaved, I absolutely think we need to plant trees up there. And I think that we can get people involved to do that, and that's not a problem at all. But I think the project needs to go forward, and maybe while the project's going on this winter, we can bring the tree board back together, sort of reactivate that, and then get trees planted there, and I think we can end up with absolutely beautiful, reforested, like you said. Those are relatively big devil strips. Let's get the right trees in there and do it. Sure.
Follow up.
Mr. Gabbard?
Citizens that contacted me and that I spoke with all said that, that they were contacted about the trees being down. They're just not happy about it. And that's why I said I thought we were under the impression that it was a tree-by-tree basis on whether they needed to be actually tore down, but it looks like every single tree went down. But I do appreciate the fact that you want to look at that. Again, that's a part of the communication of what's our plan, what's our vision, to be able to let people know when he went and said, hey, we're going to cut your 2 trees down in front of your house, but we want to plan on putting different trees, smaller trees that won't affect those areas, and we want to make sure that we replace those. And that wasn't part of the deal or part of the communication, and that's where we lose, we get some, aggravation from citizens. And one follow-up question. When we collect the leaves, do we, or this just, I mean, how do we dispose of it? Is there a compost? Do we use those to where we can then use them in the parks or for mulch or whatever? I'm just curious.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, they're not ground up finely enough. Maybe this new piece of equipment will probably grind them up quite a bit more because it does have the ability to mulch the leaves before they're sent into it. That's why when you go past the leaf truck, sometimes you'll see, leaves coming out of the top, ground up small stuff and the dust coming out of the top. Right now, we dump them down at Public Works, we dump them in that area, and then through the year, we are getting rid of them, basically going through Rumpke, and they're going into a landfill. We do have, there was some discussion with the Cincinnati Zoo that said they would take some leaves, and it was real preliminary, but that is an alternative to it. I don't know how we could, there aren't many people that are utilizing leaves as compost in that quantity. There's a huge amount of them. So it's something, that would be a great discussion for Clint Zimmerman also on what are other communities doing and how we can do that. We definitely need to find out the best way, and I don't think that we're disposing them the same way they've been disposed of for the last 10 years. I don't know that that's the best way. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Tracy?
Mr. Mayor, you spoke of staffing cuts. What staffing cuts are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at adding the secretary to the police chief, fire chief. One of those should go back to a full-time position. We're looking at adding a clerk to the clerk of court's office to take care of warrants, and we're looking at utilizing the clerk in the police department more efficiently. So those are three things that we're looking at. We're looking at potentially adding a clerk to the water department because we feel like that department's understaffed. We're also looking at relocating the water department to a place in City Hall that gives them the right office to do the work that needs to be done and taking them up a notch. They're sort of located in a bad area. We're looking at the police department structure, the actual command structure of the police department at this time. We are looking at communications and how the city does communications. We're looking at, we plan on taking advantage of Hamilton County's communications center and saving money there and cutting our expenses, our employee expenses there. We are looking at adding a Norwood 311 operation, which would provide a higher level of service and support to not just our community members, but also to businesses and visitors of the community. So there's just a ton of stuff that the administrative staff has been working on, that I've been bringing a lot of the different employees that are involved in decision-making on staffing decisions, bringing them together. You might recall that back in November, before I even took office, Hamilton County had a shared services summit. And a couple of us went to it. I went as mayor-elect, and a couple of other council members went to that shared services summit that they were having. At that time, there was a shared services for public safety, and they went through some numbers on what different communities were paying for public safety in what areas and how they were cutting costs. I didn't really attend that part of it, but I attended the other part. We took advantage. You'll recall at the very beginning of the year, we said, okay, we want to take advantage of the purchase power that Hamilton County has with their purchasing department. So, and we were already taking advantage of the state bid list, but we started taking advantage of the salt, bulk salt. So this year, our bulk salt went down considerably. You guys, we didn't even have to this year come to city council and say, hey, we went out for bid, we found out that Morton Salt will give it to us for $95 a ton. We went through Hamilton counties, and we got it for $50-something a ton. I'm pretty sure that's the number. So we saved a considerable amount of money utilizing those resources. We've utilized Hamilton County's resources for the auction to try to clean up City Hall, because it seemed like every room I walked into in City Hall was just filled with stuff. So we started putting things in the auction and getting rid of that stuff. Again, shared services. One of the other big shared services is Hamilton County Communications. A few years ago, they passed taxes, and within that, there was a crime information center tax. If every city of Norwood resident looks at their taxes, their home taxes, they'll see where they're paying a tax that we don't take advantage of. And quite frankly, it's a tax that funds the Hamilton County Communications Center. And we're paying double. So I'm not a big fan of taxation. I'm absolutely against double taxation. I'm absolutely against that part of it. So with that, with Hamilton County, in 2020, and this was brought up, I think it was brought up actually the previous council had gotten involved in it somewhat. In 2020, we found out, okay, Hamilton County will do these emergency runs for $10 a run. We didn't take advantage of it that time because it was a political hot potato, and it's not really a question of council, although I think the previous administration threw it on the council, and then it was a hot potato, and then it sort of died on the vine because you couldn't make it happen. Well, in 2021, they're doing it for $5 an emergency run. Our expense for an emergency run or for a dispatch call is $19. So how do we not only pay those taxes and not get the benefit of those taxes, and then we work over here and not only do we pay double, but we're paying more than what we should be. So that's where basically the chiefs came to me and said, let's look at this. We need to look at this. This might work out. That was a couple months ago. We started having meetings on that. And if you look at the plans and things that I'm putting in place, it's a long process. I discussed that it was civil service, that it's union positions, that it's staffing across the board within City Hall. It's the changes that we make now that lay out a good future for the city down the road. And that's what we're looking at right now is how we make changes that have a positive effect on the city in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Tracy.
Okay, well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I guess that leads me into what I would like to comment in response to your nice long-winded employee cuts, 16 of them, possibly more. I was disappointed over the last 3 days to learn some information from you. It took me contacting you to even get any information the next day, 12 hours or so later. You had stated during an email that this has been a 6-month process, and you stated here that this has been a 6-month process, and that you've had meetings after meetings after meetings. However, you have not included any of us in those meetings except for one. This meeting was sent out to us via text at 5:30 in the evening, 18 hours before it was scheduled, at 1 p.m. the next day. Middle of the day, we all have jobs. We can't just take off, on a whim. We have possibly some school stuff that we maybe have to attend. Can't take that off because you'll lose attendance. So, for us to be asked to come to a meeting just hours before it happens is a lack of communication. Getting rid of the communication center is not in the best interest of Norwood. It's not in the best interest of its citizens. It's not in the best interest of the community as a whole. This has been a staple for our city for many, many years. I wish you would have, before you decided to make anything, and it may be in all your right to do whatever you're doing, I wish you would have come to council and discussed it with council. I wish you would have taken it through the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee meeting to have it discussed through that committee. Let it come out to council. Let us help make that decision. We're also voted in by the residents as well. You know, we also have a say for the residents just as much as you do. So this email you sent out 19 items that this E911 person or persons will be taking care of. A lot of these, out of these 19, I can see you could probably split the list in half, if not more, because it's all redundant. It's mail clerk stuff, it's technology and equipment, which we already have somebody for that does that for us. So now we're having 2 or 3 people doing that process. I'm not going to go through my specific comments because some of them are not good for the air, I guess. But let's look at what Norwood Communications does, okay? What do? They take 911 calls, they take non-emergency calls, they dispatch appropriate services, fire, police, public works, and notify the health department. Do you think Hamilton County Communications is going to notify our public works, notify our health department for anything that the residents need? No. Maybe E911, or whatever you're calling it, E311. Maybe, but they also enter warrants. They enter tickets. They enter towed vehicles, enter missing persons, enter stolen cars, send hit confirmations, enter parking complaints, confirm warrants on the spot without waiting on a 24-hour basis. They cancel warrants. They contact other departments regarding warrants that police officers have in custody. They provide court dates on the spot for Norwood officers. They recite information for other agencies. They transfer 911 calls to Hamilton County Communications or the City of Cincinnati when an incident is outside of Norwood. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of things that they do that I haven't listed here. And I know that some of the dispatchers who might be watching are probably throwing things at their screen right now because I'm missing a bunch of other things. I'd like to know what Hamilton County advised you that they would do for us, because if they provided you with a list of what they do, I can tell you the list versus reality is completely off. You'll get a list of what they intend to do for the community, and then it's what they actually do while they're there. Trust me, I've been in it. I've worked as a firefighter utilizing Hamilton County Communications. I've worked as a police officer utilizing Hamilton County Communications, and I know what they do. And don't get me wrong, they do a fantastic job, okay? However, they do not do what the Norwood Communications Center does for our Norwood officers. Now, you talked about saving money. Norwood averages about 82 runs a day. These are all guesstimates by me. I've been told that nobody in that department is allowed to speak on anything, and that they've been basically told to be silent. So I had to come up with a guesstimate as best as I could over the last couple of years that I've been researching this myself. I'm guessing somewhere around 82 runs a day. Right now it's $16 per run through Hamilton County. If we were with Hamilton County today, it would be $1,312 per day for runs. Per year, $478,000 per year. Now, we go to the $5 run next year. That's great. How long is that going to last? I've been in between fire and police 20 years. So in those 20 years, it's gone up, it's gone down. I can tell you 3 years ago, it was $27.50 per run. So you're looking at a total per year of $149,000. It's about $10,000 more than what was estimated in the email. One aspect of dispatch isn't just the number, but the services that are provided to the residents. The services that are provided to the police officers, the service provided to the firefighters. It's something you're not going to get with Hamilton County. To provide such services as entering warrants, canceling warrants, entering missing persons, entering tickets, you will need to hire 2 to 6 clerks to accommodate night shift. And why I say that is because if you're working your clerks on an 8-hour basis, you're going to need second and third shifters, along with a day shifter. You're going to need people to back those clerks up when they want time off, or when when you need somebody to work part-time on a Saturday, Sunday, so that the full-timers aren't working 5 days a week. So you're not just adding 1 clerk, but you're looking to add up to 6 clerks. you have a city of 19,000 residents that will lose officers from the road to go to the station in order to enter the above warrants, missing persons, tickets, everything else that dispatch does currently for them. Some of these aspects can be handled inside the vehicle without going to the station and taking an officer off the road for an hour. And I say an hour because that's about how long it took me to enter a stolen vehicle, to enter a missing person, to enter a warrant, to cancel a warrant, to take recite money, to issue a receipt for that recite money, to kick the person out the door and say, come back for court, to get a court date for that person. It was about an hour if I was quick. So you're taking one officer, at least one officer off the road. In this city, probably 3. And on night shift, you're probably looking at half the force right there. Now, I haven't touched on response times yet. While Hamilton County Communications is good at handling departments, they do provide emergency dispatch services for 105 other police and fire departments. That's covering over 42 political jurisdictions. If we go to this, that's 43. That's a whole lot of jurisdictions that they're covering, and they're not going to have the priority for our officers, for our firefighters. A lot of 911 non-emergency calls handled by Hamilton County Communications. I can remember many times as an officer being placed on hold when I placed a call to the comm center, only to radio my information in, instead of waiting on hold. Even then, there were times that I heard the phrase, 5 George unit, calling, stand by. And I can tell you, there have been a couple times that I've been in a fight, and I've tried to call out 5 George and my call sign, and I've heard, stand by. And I've had to literally call out, emergency, I'm in a fight. So, I can tell you all the years of listening to Norwood dispatches and Norwood radio traffic, not once have I heard them say, stand by to their officers unless they're looking at a warrant, unless they're getting a report number, not once. I guess I kind of broke this down a little bit instead of reading straight off the papers because it is a bit long, and I know I'm long-winded on this, but I am very passionate about this and keeping our dispatch because, for one, you're looking at longer response times. You're looking at going from probably 3 minutes to 7 minutes. A heart attack situation makes all the difference in a 4-minute time response. An officer that says, I'm at UDF on the north end on Carthage Avenue because he doesn't have the specific address, our dispatchers know exactly where to send these officers. Even officers that are coming to help them, they know exactly where to send them without an address. They know that the dispatchers here know the landmarks. The comm center does not know the landmarks. They don't know where some of these places are if a specific address isn't called out. An officer can say he's northbound on Montgomery, coming up on UDF near Lee's Chicken. And dispatchers here in the city of Norwood know exactly where he or she is at. They don't need to give a specific address. This is an absolute disappointment that council and the residents have had no say in this at all. 0% say. Not to sound arrogant, and it will sound arrogant here, but you have a council member here who has that experience. I've proved it a little bit in this little letter that I've handed to everybody on council floor. And, I know what this comm center does. I know what Hamilton County Comm Center does. I know what is going to slow our officers down, slow our firefighters down. I am extremely disappointed, and I hope that you reconsider what you are thinking of doing. And I hope that you allow this to go into the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee for discussion, let it come out to council floor, and let us take an opportunity to vote yea or nay on this.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Bonzo.
Just to clarify, if we were to move to the Hamilton County Communications Center, I mean, wouldn't there have to be actions that council takes in order for that to happen? Maybe that question could be to the law director.
Mr. Moore?
On a couple of fronts, I think so. I think that the only way that Hamilton County can enter an agreement with the political subdivision is with its legislative authority, the way the statutes tend to be written. I think it would be a contract that would cost more than $50,000 a year. And I know for a fact that council would have to be changes to the appropriations and the financial recovery plan to reflect these changes. So there's a lot of places where council votes would be required.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. So that being said, I just want to, empower. I mean, I don't think that this council is helpless in any situation, and so if there needs to be debate and discussion of this more than just at a meeting, maybe it needs to be a committee meeting, it can be referred in new business, or we can make a motion and refer it to a committee right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Gabbard?
I would personally like to see it to go to the committee of a whole. That way everyone can have discussion on it. I'm a little bit disappointed on this as well. We should not be basing every discussion, every decision that we make on strictly cost. There's something to be said about having our own services here. I mean, if we do this, then if I was an employee here in the city, I would be scared, because next up we look and see, we get rid of the water department, we get rid of the health department, we get rid of our public works, we get rid of our police and fire. We go to the city, we go to county mutual joint systems. I just think that, I'm not saying that this is not something to look into and discuss, but again, there's something to be said about having our own service here. We're one of the last ones here, and once it's gone, it's gone. There's no getting it back at all. And so I just think that we should have lots more discussion on this, get a feel of what the city wants to do. They're the taxpayers, they're the ones got to pay for it, and see what comes out of all that. But I would really discourage just having the administration make this decision, as I'm not sure. And maybe we do a two-tier thing on it. From my understanding, I think that the fire department is in favor of going. If so, let them go. Let's let them go, test the waters, see what's like. Because I have to agree with Mr. Geraci. Response times will go up, and what they promise is not what they're going to deliver. That's just a fact. I've been a part of several departments as a police officer, as a firefighter, as a paramedic, and I've experienced a lot of the same things as well. They'll promise us stuff, but that $5 thing, once they got us, all that's left is the city of Cincinnati. They've got everybody else, so I mean, now they got a monopoly. They can do what they want, and we have no control over that. No, there's no negotiating a price. They're just going to say this is what it is and stick it to you. So I would just encourage the administration to hold some maybe town hall meetings, put this in committee of a whole, and just have further discussions on this before we make a decision that we can't get back.
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Tracy, Mr. Gabbard did a really nice job of hitting some points I wanted to hit, so I'm going to try the best I can to go through my notes here and not double down on everything. But this is something that, I heard of as seemed more concrete just this past week and weekend, and that was really frightening to me, since we did have that late invite to somebody from Springfield Township, which I don't know why we'd be talking to them. Maybe they just switched and they were trying to talk to us. I don't know. But some of the concerns or questions I do have with this is, why is this decision being made? Like, what's the root cause to make this decision? Is it easier, something I heard is it's easier for our safety services to run mutual aid with other municipalities, which is great that we can do that, but it's not the main necessity and need for them. It's the protection and safety of those that live in Norwood. So that one is really a non-starter for me anyway. Is it to save money? Like, Mr. Mayor sent out a bunch of figures about how much we spend on safety services, how much other municipalities, I guess, are comparable sizes spend on them. And getting rid of dispatch, it just doesn't really lower that bar much. So to me, it doesn't really do anything. And one question I have, that Mr. Gabbard touched on this a little bit, is, you know, it's awesome that we do have and offer that dispatch center here. Our response times are stellar. To see those even double would be very bad. You know, when you have life-saving measures, life-saving instances where time matters, having those response times doubled, if not even tripled, that would be huge disjustice for our citizens. And a question I have is, why are we not instead selling the fact that we have awesome police, awesome fire, we have our own dispatch center? Why are we not selling that to prospective residents, businesses, looking at new ways to build income for the city of Norwood, rather than trim this little area here that's really not going to make much of a difference, and then sell that, sell our location. We are called the Gym of the Highlands for a reason. Dust it off, get out of the dirt, dust it off, and sell that. Sell what we have already. And you mentioned, getting rid of the dinosaurs and that. I've heard that too. But just because a process is old doesn't mean it's bad. Maybe it's old because it's been there a while because it works. And it's something that's valued and cherished by those that have came through in our seats in the past, by the residents of Norwood who choose to move here because our response times, who choose to move here because our stellar safety services. Maybe it's just a good process. And another one is, some I've heard, I'm still doing research, is that $5 a run thing is, they're able to do that because they got a grant that kind of allows them to do that. What happens when that grant runs out? Now they're price fixing how much we're going to get per run. And our cost starts to climb back up. And then maybe 5-10 years from now, it's like, well, we should have got rid of our dispatch because we're paying just the same for a crappy product. What do we do then? What happens when we realize we made a mistake? And it's near impossible to go back without spending a huge chunk of money that we don't have now and we may not have then. I don't know. There's all these questions. There's a lot of meat on the bone here with questions. And outside of that, outside of all those things, I don't want to see any of those employees, many of whom have been there for years, almost decades, doing good quality work for the city of Norwood, just out of a job. Just because we want to save a little bit of money this year, a little more next year, and then after that, what happens? I think this is, unfortunately, this is saving money on the back of the public's safety. And I would very much encourage you to rethink this decision and look a little deeper into it. And instead of getting sold on promises, let's look out for the residents and think what's really best for them. And if that means I got to pay another tax and still pay for this dispatch center we have in Norwood, so if something happens to me, my family, my parents, that we're going to get there on time and get them taken care of, then I'll gladly pay it. I don't care what it is.
Thank you, Mr. Kels. Mr. DiNardo.
Thanks. We've heard this a couple times since I've been on council, and I remember that because I'm not as passionate or experienced as a couple you are. You have history or have had the job before and things like that. But I have heard this a few times about potentially going to the county. And back then, I thought, well, it's a good idea to explore because we had some of those early preliminary figures. And I even remember hearing the $5 thing at the beginning of the spring. So just from a purely financial standpoint, it is absolutely something we should be looking into. Not necessarily pull the trigger, and I do welcome conversation, and I think it's a good idea to try to, bring it to the floor for us to discuss some of those pros and cons. But I'd really encourage this council to look at it through the lens of true pros and cons. And that means that the financial picture has to be put forward. And I'd really like to explore, if it's possible, some concrete numbers on things like service time, or how do we quantify the other value propositions outside of those dollars. And I think the police chief I really expect that he'll be a big part of helping us do that quantifying. It sounded like he was part of bringing it forward in the first place. Was that correct? Or?
That's correct. Those
Yeah.
chiefs brought this forward.
Yeah, so I don't want to discount the fact that, our police department, the head of the police department is the one weighing this up and potentially feeling that, there won't be a massive loss of service. I don't know that. I'm just hearing that a police chief is telling us potentially that's okay. The point is, let's be sure to really evaluate this instead of already predicting that there's going to be a loss of this, or there's going to be a negative financial impact 2 years from now. Let's have that conversation in a true, as close to objective as we possibly can. But the point on having the conversation in the first place, I think it's warranted, and I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Noda. Mr. Tracy.
Just to touch back on, because I didn't want to make mine so extremely long, to touch back on the so-called tax for the Crime Information Center. So the Crime Information Center is not technically run by the Hamilton County Communications Center. It is run by a director. Maybe it's the director of the Hamilton County Communications Center. But it is not run through them. It is a completely separate building. What this Crime Information Center is it was originally assisted with establishment by the Department of Homeland Security. This information center was to set up a common area for departments, department chiefs, department liaisons to congregate during a mass casualty event, such as a terrorist event, a natural disaster, tornadoes, floods, anything that could cause potential to mass casualties within this county. They can set up their communication center, their hub, their network, their one main source at this one building, so that we don't have departments going all to the communication center. Anything focused on that mass casualty event goes straight to that Crime Information Center, and that's how they handle their basically command post. So my house is valued at $145,000. I pay $3.41 a year. $3.41 a year for me to be a part of the Crime Information Center. Pennies. If that's one big argument as to why we're looking to get rid of our communication center, it's a flimsy argument to say the least, because it's $3 a year. It's nothing compared to the other taxes that we're paying. That helps Norwood anyway. We're getting that help anyway. Every community pays for it. And I get that, we look at the financial aspect and, let's look at, but sometimes finance versus lives is completely different. I can tell you that the chiefs can come forward and say there is not going to be any slowdown in response time. There's not going to be, I'll tell you right now, today, there was a robbery at Fifth Third Bank. I was listening to the scanner all day today while I was working, and I literally timed it. 1 minute our police department took to get there. 1 minute. There was another incident, I don't know, I didn't catch the street or where it was at. I know somebody was armed with a weapon. I believe I timed it at 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and they arrested the person as they pulled up. 2 minutes. And that was from, I mean, that's just an absolute, those are amazing times right there. I can tell you, you will not get that going through the county. You're looking at a 3 to 4 minute additional delay. So you're probably looking at a response time for both of those incidents somewhere around 6, 7, possibly 8 minutes. It just, sometimes the financial aspect just, it doesn't coincide with the lives, if my brother, my sister, my mother, my grandmother is suffering from a heart attack, and I could have a squad there within 5 minutes, I don't want to wait an additional 4 minutes for a squad to get there. That additional 4 minutes, that additional oxygen deprivation of the brain can cause some serious damage if that person survives. There's also that possibility that person doesn't survive. That extra 4 or 5 minutes on a structure fire could mean a total loss of the building, could mean saving the life of a child, a mother, a father. It could even mean saving the life of a dog. The fire department gets there 4 or 5 minutes later, and they're not able to get in that building and have to do an exterior attack because the fire has grown so much within a matter of seconds. That's a human life right there that could be lost. We sit here and we talk about COVID, and we talk about how many cases we're starting to get here in Norwood, and we're starting to talk about rising COVID cases, and we need to protect the lives of people that are here. We bought brand new ambulances with filtration specific for COVID. Who knows? Maybe somebody that gets infected with COVID doesn't take it extremely well and needs that extra 3 or 4 minutes to get a squad and get to the hospital. We've been banging our heads over the COVID situation, and it's the same with our dispatch. We really need to look at money versus life, and I can tell you, out of 19,000 residents, we're probably looking at 12 to 14,000 that would absolutely support keeping this dispatch.
Thank you, Mr. Jersey. Mr. Norwood, I see your hand up.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to repeat, because as soon as I said it the first time, I don't think it was heard. It's really important that we try to stay objective when making the decisions, and part of that means I know that you've had experiences that pose a risk. There's a risk that times could go up, and maybe that's a very real risk to you. But we're doing that in isolation, so I think your initial comments around we really need to talk about this and have some of those players, like the police chief, who I have to imagine is not incentivized to put his department or the citizens he works for and supports at a greater risk. He's not incentivized to do that. So his motivation for supporting this decision has to come from somewhere. I don't know it. Sounds like you guys don't know it. So let's hear that. So that part of the argument, I'm like, yeah, let's have the conversation. Let's bring these players together. That's a good idea. What's not a good idea is to already know that we're going to have 4 minutes added on, to already know that the monetary savings that are being proposed are not going to come to fruition. I think that that's a dangerous thing to do in a lot of our debates, and I think, so the first part, let's support having the conversation, bringing all the players and getting the information on the table. That's smart. Let's not go that next step and say, I already know what's going to happen. Let's say there's a risk that this could happen. Let's hear it out. I think there's a really dangerous path to walk down if you keep doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Nunner. Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. DiNardo, I think those are very, very wise words, and I couldn't agree more. I think we need to stay objective. I think we need to look at this. I can tell you what I'll be doing, and it's through admiration and respect for the Norwood Fire Department and the Norwood Police Department. I will be wondering what they say and what their opinions are about this move, and I can tell you that if it deteriorates their response time or it deteriorates their services, they will be against this. So I'll be looking at the members of the police to tell me, and fire and our safety services to tell us to see if they are agreeing to this, and if they are, it's because the powers that be may have a little more insight to this than we do, and so that's what I'll be looking for. So wise words, Mr. DiNardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I mean, there's a monetary savings, it's something we have to look at, but if there's a 1% chance of any response times being delayed, which is, I think is statistically likely, then is that money being saved worth that life that could be lost, the structure that could be lost? I mean, that's, I think, something that's reasonable to discuss. Not just kind of saying, oh, it's going to double, triple. We don't have that data. I agree. But I think if there's a 1% chance that our quality of service deteriorates, I think, that's what we have to look at. Is that lesser product, or that chance that there's lesser product, worth what we're saving? I think that's reasonable to talk about and look at. One thing I would like to ask too, and just put out there, that I would like to not just hear from the chiefs of fire and police,
Sure.
but I would like to hear from some of the officers on the streets, some of the firefighters, the EMS technicians that are on the streets, that are getting these calls and getting these sites. I would like to hear from Lieutenant Rankin, who is and has been leading the dispatch center for a while, who I have been told has been told not to talk to the mayor about this or anybody else, which for life of me I don't understand why. It seems like he would have really solid information about something like this, good or bad. I would like to hear from some dispatchers that can kind of give us a description of what they do and how that job works, why they're needed in this city. And quite frankly, I'd like to hear from some residents and what they have to say as well, because this is something this is bigger than any of us in this room. This is a decision that is going to affect our children, our children's children, and future generations. If we have something good, it's quality, and we know it's good, then the cost of it isn't really my main concern. It's not really affecting our FRP standings because we've had it. It passed last year, the year before that. It's not like it's grown into some monster that we can't financially control anymore. It's reasonable. And we just did big updates last year when last council voted it down. If we need more training for our employees in there, let's get it. If we need better equipment, software, let's get it. We should be fostering growth of this department and their skill set versus just cutting them out and saving in our grand total budget, not that much. And the amount we will save, a couple $100,000 to $1 million a year for a year and a half, 2 years, to me that's not worth it. It's not worth losing one of the best things we have in our city. They're the reason why our police and fire units get to where they go so quickly. And that's all I have to say about it tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Tracy?
Mr. DiNardo, I appreciate your comments, and yes, the first time it was heard. I understand. Take an objective look at it. However, you also cannot discount the experience of myself, Mr. Gabbard, who have the knowledge just as much as the chief of police. We've been there. We've been in the trenches. We've seen how it works. Just as I'm not going to sit here and try to discount any experience that you have in finance. Absolutely not. There's no chance that I'm going to discount that at all. I look at you, anytime that I have a finance question, I've called you and asked you, or I've sent you a text and asked you. That's a little out of my realm, and I understand that. I know where my weaknesses are. Finance is one of my weaknesses. I understand that. My strength is public safety. That's why I took on the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee chairperson position. My strength is public safety. Mr. Gabbard's strength is public safety. We're two resources within that public safety realm that you have right here on council. I can tell you, I have friends that are police officers in the city of Norwood. Friends that I've grown up with. Friends that 4 or 5 years old, I've been friends with them since. And I can tell you they are not happy. The morale over the last week has dropped to the bottom. And yes, it may have been just communications with the police chief, with the fire chief. But I haven't heard any communications with the police union, with the police officers, with the fire union, the firefighters. All I've heard is head figures. Head figures. I had a saying of, remember where you came from. When you become a sergeant, a lieutenant, a chief, you need to be an officer's chief, an officer's lieutenant, a firefighter's lieutenant, because you have to remember where you came from. And you have to remember that your most important thing other than the residents are your officers, are your firefighters. You look out for their safety, not just try to cut money and possibly risk not just the residents but the officers' safety as well. I can tell you, I can walk in here in a committee of the whole meeting and go over every single thing that happens with a county dispatch department from start to finish. If I make a traffic stop, I get a person with a warrant, I'll tell you every single step that has to involve it, and it'll be at least an hour if you can go fast. You're taking that officer off the road for an hour. And if we've got 3 or 4 officers making traffic stops to do that, you're taking 3 or 4 officers off the road for an hour.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Thompson.
I think I want to appreciate everybody's comments. I think there's been a lot of really good comments, and thank you for making them. But I think the time has come to move this to committee of the whole, where we can discuss further, get some people here who we want to hear from. So I would like to motion that we put this into committee of the whole.
Motion by Mr. Thompson, put it in committee of the whole. Mr. Gabbard.
Second that.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, aye. Motion passes. Anything else, Mr. Thompson?
No.
Is that okay? Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Thank you, Mayor Snyder. That concludes administrative reports. Moving on to unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business? Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up under new business, but Mr. Gabbard brought up the trees on Indian Mound during the previous thing, so I'll bring it up under unfinished business. I'd like to put into streets and infrastructure the matter of trees on Indian Mound, potential tree replacement on Indian Mound, as well as a review of the 5 foot from the I believe it's curb rule that we have for trees. It might be what we want to have there in place, but just to take a look at it and see if that's what we want to continue doing. I too had several residents, I mean, I live on Indian Mound, so a lot of residents reached out to me about it, and I think we could discuss plans to do tree replacement once the road is done, or things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any other unfinished business? Thank you. Moving on to new business. Any new business? Mr. Gabbard.
Yeah, I had a discussion with our safety service director a while back, and I was, asking him about, us using local Norwood businesses whenever the city needs projects done. And he said, unfortunately, a lot of the businesses that we have used in the past or would like to use, the safety service director doesn't have on file, the things that they need to have, like their insurance and, their workers' comp and just proof of all those kind of things. So I want to just take a moment and encourage all of our local businesses that would be interested in potentially doing work for the city, being able to bid on things that need to be bid on, to reach out to the safety service director, find out what they need, and get those in. That way we can use local here and support our own businesses. And I just think that's a good idea, and it's just a matter of not knowing, and a lot of our businesses not knowing. So just get the word out and get your whatever that information is, get that into them so we can use you when need be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Any other new business? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So on September 30th, it was the final day that Norwood had a YMCA in our city. And the building that the YMCA was in is now vacant. So there's been some preliminary discussions with the Greater Cincinnati YMCA leadership from the school district, the safety service director, others, a few council members, exploring whether the city can take over the closed Richard E. Linder YMCA as potentially our community center. We've already had a few meetings with them, like I said, and the YMCA, including their CEO, is highly engaged in the process, and they're excited about the potential that might happen there. While I was hoping that we could get a plan together and bring it to council for kind of review and to talk about it, I think we need to, bring it to the public earlier so that we can have more discussions and get more political will to kind of get this done and get the public excited about it. I believe that this could potentially be a very popular item to move it and to have an actual building that is, as Mr. Kelch and I talked about earlier, that's actually made to be a community center and not a building that's made to be a school, which is where our current community center is. So I want to refer the following item to the Parks and Recreation Committee, quote, potential to move our community center to Richard E. Linder YMCA building on Sherman Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Any other new business? Mr. DiNardo.
Yep, a little happy note, that one of our residents, Alex Malosh, planted a tree. And that's all he did, but it was a really cool thing in that he went through a similar process. We've seen a couple times this year. We've seen like the Floral and Hudson project, where citizens are making sure they're going through the channels, checking to see that their little mini project, putting park bench, planting a tree, isn't doing any harm to the city. So it's a nice check-in, making sure that they're all good, but then going ahead and just doing things to beautify our city. So we want to encourage and thank people like Alex for planting a tree and doing it the way he did it. So
Awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. It's a cool little thing. So
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Any other new business? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So a similar item to what I just referred to the Parks and Rec Committee, but different. So another opportunity that potentially could be looked at, and this I think is definitely a lot more of a, we need to investigate this before deciding, but
The leadership of the Greater Cincinnati YMCA has also offered up their organization as a group that could professionally run our recreation department, including our pool. There's advantages that they've said to moving that way. They offer very high-quality training to all of the coaches and staff and everything else. They can customize their offerings to whatever we want to do. So do we want volleyball? Do we want basketball? Whatever we want for our youth, they can customize. But again, that has not been fully investigated yet. It may not be the best for Norwood. It might be. I don't know. So I don't think anybody knows that's heard about the idea. So I do want to refer examining to the Parks and Recreation Committee. I want to refer examining using the Greater Cincinnati YMCA to run the rec department.
Thank you, Mr. Bunzel. Any other new business? Thank you. We'll move on to communications. P1, OKI Regional Council of Governments regarding the current representation term expiration. Mrs. Williams.
Letter dated November 6, 2020. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the term of your current representative on the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments Board of Directors for 2020 will expire upon convening the Board of Directors of the Council on January 14th of 2021. In order for the new Board of Directors to be duly convened at the Board of Directors meeting, it is requested that your agency submit the name of its appointment to the OKI Board of Directors. The OKI Articles of Agreement require that persons representing counties, cities, townships, or planning agencies must be selected by the governing body of that organization. When your agency has taken official action to designate its representative, please return the enclosed form to the Secretary. Your reply is needed as quickly as possible and no later than January 8th of 2021. Representation on the OKI Board of Directors is not a commitment to fund OKI. Non-federal monies to operate OKI are obtained mainly from participating counties through funding agreements. The purpose of local representation on OKI is to assure that work on behalf of the region is responsive to local needs. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated. Sincerely, Mark Polisinski.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess our current representative is Mr. John Breeden. Yeah, they have like an attendance sheet in here, and he's been a decent number of the meetings. A lot of meetings are executive committees, so you don't have to be at those meetings if you're not on the executive committee. So I guess my question maybe to Mr. Breeden through the chair is if he wants to, continue serving if the council wants him to.
Mr. Breeden.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Bonsall, thank you for that question. It has been my privilege to serve on the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Board of Directors, and it's been a learning experience, and it's been quite insightful. And I would love to continue sitting as our representative, as Norwood's representative, the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Board of Directors. However, I don't want to be stingy, so if someone else would like to throw their hat in the ring, and if they're interested, I'd be willing to have that discussion. But if you see fit to have me as your representative, I would love to have that position.
Thank you, Mr. Breeden. Mr. Gabbard.
I make a motion that we have Mr. Breeden represent the city of Norwood on the OKI board.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard?
Do you want to make an amendment to receive and file?
Yeah, the receive and file, yeah, I'm sorry, thank you for,
council.
I appreciate that.
Receive and file the letter.
And we nominate Mr. Breeden to be our representative.
Perfect, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Kelch?
Second that motion.
Second that motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Breeden. Moving on to item P2, City Auditor Jim Stith regarding the new Assistant Deputy Auditor's salary. Mrs. Williams.
Letter dated 11/17 of 2020. City Council, City of Norwood. Dear members of council, the auditor's office is hiring a new assistant deputy auditor to replace Bargy, and I'm going to kill the last name, Petralia. After an exhaustive search, we have found an excellent and experienced candidate, Melissa Radford. Given her background, education, and experience, we are requesting a starting salary of $36,000 a year, which is 17.31 cents per hour. This amount is within the council's established salary range and can be managed within the requested and anticipated 2021 budget. As this amount is above the lowest level of the salary range, we are requesting council's approval of this starting rate. Sincerely, Jim Stith.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo.
I make a motion that we receive the letter, but also that we approve the rate. At the discussions, I'll explain.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Thompson?
Second that.
Second. Any discussion?
I can do it real quick.
Mr. DiNardo?
Mr. Stith came to the Finance Committee meeting and kind of pre-read the letter that we just heard. Some things I can share was the first, there was a ton of applicants. They went through, I think it was over 20 solid ones, multiple CPAs applied. I think the takeaway here was that people were coming in that were almost way overqualified for the position. In respect to the hire, this was a very heavily qualified individual. She kind of went head-to-head with another heavily qualified individual, and I think Marcus was kind of making the hiring decision that then went to Jim for approval. Just kind of saying that this motion to approve the salary rate is, as mentioned in the letter, still within the range, but probably grossly less than what she could maybe get elsewhere in a non-civic environment. So,
thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Any other discussion? Motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Thompson, to receive and file the letter and accept the salary request from Mr. Stith.
Yes, please.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P3, we have a letter from MSD. Mrs. Williams?
This is an email that my office received from Cincinnati MSD. It's a notice of public hearings. It's for proposed budgets for the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati, the 2021 to 2025 Capital Improvement Program budget, and their 2021 operating budget. The Hamilton County Board of County Commissioners will conduct 2 public hearings to consider the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati's proposed 2021 to 2025 Capital Improvement Program budget and proposed 2021 operating budget. Please note, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, these meetings are currently being held virtually and can be accessed both online and via televised broadcast media. Hearings will be held on Thursday, December 3rd at 2020 at 1:15 p.m. and Tuesday, December 10th, 2020 at 1:15 p.m. MSD will publish a legal notice of these hearings in the Cincinnati Enquirer on November 21st and December 5th.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we receive and file the communication.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. May I have a second? Mr. Braden.
Second, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item Q, all members are present, so we'll move on to adjournment. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Please call the roll, Mrs. Williams.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, we're adjourned.